All right, let's roll.
What exactly is human trafficking?
I'm sorry?
What exactly is human trafficking?
Okay. So human trafficking is basically a form of modern-day slavery. It is where there are three people involved. It's not just two parties involved like regular exploitation. And so you've got three parties involved. You have a trafficker, you have a purchaser, and you have a victim. And human trafficking is basically modern day slavery, and it's having people that they use force or fraud or coercion to cause the victim to do something against their will. Labor trafficking, sex trafficking, there's many forms, but the thing that differentiates human trafficking from all other forms of exploitation is there are three parties involved.
How long has it been around?
Forever. Literally, as long as there's been recorded human history, there have been cultures taking advantage of other cultures. People have enslaved people as a result of war, like the Romans used to do. There's stories about the Egyptians enslaving the Israelites because they were afraid that they were going to overpopulate. And then in our painful past of America, we enslaved people based on what they look like. And at this point, it's now taking place just anyone who can take advantage of the vulnerabilities of anyone else. And so it's not really based on what you look like or your socioeconomic status. It's simply someone who can exploit the vulnerabilities of another person.
What is the percent of people who get rescued or removed from trafficking?
As far as I know, it's 2%.
Who do you believe has the power to stop human trafficking? You can take your time. We'll
Yeah. Okay. Well, I believe, honestly, that it starts with each individual. And I believe that you could stop it or you could try to stop it by passing laws and whatnot, but I believe it's really a matter of the heart. And you could rescue victims all day. You could put girls and boys in safe houses all day. Police officers and law enforcement could arrest traffickers all day. But the real problem and what's going to end human trafficking, especially sex trafficking like Lighthouse for Life fights, will be ending the demand for trafficking, because it is a business and it's motivated by money. And so it's exactly like a restaurant, and the restaurant is always going to do well if people want to come there and pay for the food. And so because there is an appetite in our culture for people to pay for commercial sex, human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, will continue until the demand is crushed.
What happens to people after they get rescued from human trafficking?
Wow, okay, well, it depends on if it's male or female, and if they're an adult or if they're a child. I would answer that from the perspective of minor females in South Carolina particularly, because that's who our nonprofit is really targeting, trying to help. And right now, if a female were to be rescued from human trafficking in Richland or Lexington counties, they would go into the DSS custody. They might go into DJJ, depending on if law enforcement can really identify them as a trafficking survivor and not just someone who's been labeled a runaway or an incorrigible youth. And if they go into DSS custody, they're going to land in a group home, or they're going to land in foster care. They may land in their original family of origin, depending on if mom and dad are suitable caregivers. A lot of times, 84% of the youth that we see that get taken into trafficking have already had some kind of interaction with foster care, family services, DSS, DJJ, so they may not have a home to return to, but that's what happens right now.
What exactly,
You're fine.
How are people affected through going such experience?
I'm sorry?
How are people affected after going through such an experience?
How is a survivor,
Yes, ma'am.
how do they feel?
Yeah, like physically.
Okay, well, they have a tremendous amount of trauma that they have been through, and it can't really be paralleled or compared equally to anything that I'm aware of, because obviously they have some PTSD. They have trauma bonding, where they actually don't even see themselves as a victim most of the time. They might have sort of a Stockholm syndrome or some sort of survival bond with their trafficker. So they may leave trafficking and get to a safe environment and run from the safe environment back to trafficking as many as 5 times before they'll stay out of the life. A lot of times they, like I said, they might have a chemical dependency that has kept them there. The trafficker might be the father of their child, or might have blackmailed them with some material that they didn't want to get out in the public. The trafficker might have held one of their family members against them, and threatened the life of this person. So survivors are a lot of times not even realizing they're survivors until later. I met a survivor one time, and it took her 3 months before she understood that she was a survivor. She told me her story over lunch, and when I was listening, in my mind I was like, oh my, you've been through a lot, you've been trafficked, but you don't even realize it. And at the time she thought her trafficker was her boyfriend, and about 3 or 4 months later, she came into the office one day and said, Jen, I've realized that I was trafficked for 5 years, and he wasn't my boyfriend, and he was my pimp. And so each one of them feel differently depending on how long they were trafficked, how they got out of it, how they got into it. Because if you were trafficked by your family, you might feel differently than if you were, gorilla pimp picks you up off the sidewalk and kidnaps you, which is not very common, but it does happen. But the things they share in common would be a severe sense of PTSD, the realization that it's not their fault, that they are a victim. They struggle with the mindset that they are not worth more than what they could do as being used as a commodity. They struggle with a sense of boundaries and what healthy relationships look like and what honest love looks like, and with self-esteem. They sometimes have traumatic brain injuries because they've been beaten a lot and mistreated, and so they may have like some symptoms that look like hyperactivity, or hyper, I forget what they call it, but it's like they've gotten so many concussions that they can't focus. They have short-term memory issues sometimes. So the sense of recovery could take, like if someone was trafficked 18 years, it may take them 18 years to recover from that. Like, you won't just go through a 6-month program and be finished. And the age that you started being hurt, I've known people that started being hurt from the time that they can remember. And so for them to recover and how they feel when they're rescued is completely different than someone who was growing up healthy and then, got intersected with a trafficker who tricked them into something. So it's definitely like person by person.
What exactly does this organization do to help?
Okay. Lighthouse for Life, we have 2 big ideas that we do. One is awareness and education and training, and we'll go anywhere in the state of South Carolina and talk to anyone for any amount of time that we're given. We have traveled 2 hours and spoken to 1 person before. We have traveled a few minutes and talked to 700 people before. We have shared with people that are Girl Scouts and youth groups and high school classes and middle school classes, all the way up to audiences such as mental health workers, pastors, guidance counselors, school bus drivers, school resource officers, paramedics, firefighters, and we've provided training that's been as short as a 10-minute chat and a 5-hour day. So we will just raise awareness in any platform that we're allowed to at no cost. And the other thing that we're doing is we're opening a safe house for girls that are aged 12 to 21, and there's no such place open at this time in our state. And our safe house is located in Richland County, and it's actually already paid for, and the rooms are furnished. And at this point, today being the 10th of November, we are working with fire marshals to meet the last few regulations that they have and expectations and standards that they have, and then we'll get some inspections, and then DSS will come and visit our facility, and once they sign off on it, we'll be good to go.
Where can we start as a community to help solve this issue?
You can start the way you're starting right now, which is by getting your head out of the sand and being brave enough to talk about it. You can start by taking care of yourself, because if you're not healthy, it's the same as someone who is a caregiver. You know, if you're not healthy, then you can't take care of those who are depending on you. So I would say that each individual citizen needs to, first of all, evaluate themselves and make sure that they're in a safe environment, in a safe relationship, that they've got boundaries, that they are being careful on social media, that they've got realistic expectations of relationships. And then I would say, once you know that you're okay, you should look into the sphere of influence that you're in and check and see, you know, if you're a parent, do you have good relationship with your children? Do your children know that it doesn't matter what they do, that you are on their side, and if they make mistakes, that you will forgive them and help them? If you've got friends or family members that you are noticing, you know, some signs of trafficking or whatever, being brave enough to understand that this is not about you, and it doesn't matter if they get mad at you in the temporary, because you want them to be around in the long term. So you start by making sure you're okay, then you check on those in your sphere of influence, and then you try to just leverage the relationships that you have, the opportunities that you have, the connections that you have, the environments that you're in. For example, I can get into a school and share with students a lot easier if students or teachers invite me in, whereas if I cold call the school and try to tell them how important it is to listen, you know, it doesn't make a lot of sense to them. So using the gifts and talents that you have, there are people that are great at graphic design, and so I don't ask them to stuff envelopes for Lighthouse for Life. I ask them to help create flyers and help me with marketing. So we really try to tell people to tap into their own giftings, their own joys, their own talents, and reflect on what they're already doing and not reinvent the wheel.
Well, that's all we have right now.
Okay.
Questions. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Hope it wasn't too dry.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
Awesome.
Okay, good.